What if I told you that suffering, the one thing we spend our entire lives trying to avoid, might actually be the key to unlocking our truest potential? It's an idea that feels counterintuitive, even unfair. After all, why should pain, loss, or hardship be necessary for growth? Yet some of the greatest minds in history, from philosophers to spiritual leaders, have insisted that suffering isn't just a random, cruel fact of existence. It's a teacher, a crucible for transformation. But does suffering really have meaning, or are we just trying to make sense of life's chaos? Think about the moments that shaped you the most. Were they times of comfort, or were they the moments when life broke you open, forcing you to rebuild stronger? From the existential writings of Nietzsche to the resilience of everyday people who faced unimaginable odds, the value of suffering is a theme woven through the human story. Suffering is one of those universal experiences that unites every human being, no matter their culture, status, or background. But why does it exist? Philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche believed that suffering isn't just an unfortunate byproduct of life. It's essential. His famous quote, "What does not kill me makes me stronger," encapsulates the idea that hardship forces us to confront our limitations, adapt, and grow. Without suffering, there's no struggle. Without struggle, there's no progress. Think about physical exercise. It's literally the act of putting stress on your muscles so they can rebuild stronger. What if emotional and psychological pain worked the same way, breaking us down just enough to allow for? But not everyone sees suffering as inherently meaningful. Existentialist thinkers like Albert Camus argued that life is often absurd, and meaning is something we impose on suffering to make it bearable. Yet, even Camus suggested that in embracing this absurdity, we reclaim a kind of freedom and power. Modern psychology offers a similar perspective. Post-traumatic growth, a concept studied by psychologists, shows that people who endure significant hardships often emerge with a renewed sense of purpose, greater empathy, and a deeper understanding of themselves. But why does this happen for some and not for others? Is it about perspective, the ability to reframe suffering as an opportunity rather than a setback? Or is it something deeper, something intrinsic to the human spirit? Religious and spiritual traditions have long sought to answer these questions. In Buddhism, suffering, dukkha, is seen as a fundamental part of existence, but not without purpose. It's through suffering that we come to understand attachment and transcend it. Similarly, in Christianity, the concept of redemptive suffering suggests that enduring pain can lead to spiritual growth and even salvation. These perspectives don't necessarily contradict modern secular views. They complement them. Both seem to agree on one thing. The way we respond to suffering defines its value. Whether we let it crush us or transform us depends not just on the suffering itself, but on the stories we tell about it. But let's bring this closer to home. Consider the most painful experiences in your life. Did they leave you broken, or did they lead to a breakthrough? For some, grief becomes a springboard for deeper connections with others. For others, failure becomes a motivator to pursue success with greater passion. The late psychologist Viktor Frankl, who survived the horrors of a concentration camp, wrote that humans are driven by a will to meaning. He argued that even in the face of unimaginable suffering, finding a purpose is what keeps us alive. So the question isn't whether suffering has value, it's whether we're willing to search for it. Interestingly, science also weighs in on the transformative power of suffering. Neuroscientific studies show that the brain processes emotional pain in ways similar to physical pain, but it also rewires itself in response. This process, known as neuroplasticity, suggests that our brains can adapt and grow stronger after adversity, especially when paired with intentional coping mechanisms like mindfulness or seeking support. Think about individuals who faced significant challenges, a life-threatening illness, a heartbreaking loss, or even public failure. Many of them emerge with not only resilience, but a clearer sense of purpose. Could it be that suffering, as painful as it is nature's way of nudging us toward a deeper understanding of ourselves? Yet we have to acknowledge the flip side. Suffering doesn't always lead to growth. It can also break people. Chronic pain, trauma, or endless struggles can leave scars that feel insurmountable. This raises an important question. Is it the suffering itself that holds value, or is it how we process and respond to it? Studies on resilience reveal that factors like community, mindset, and even a sense of humor play a significant role in whether suffering leads to personal growth or despair. In other words, suffering might plant the seed for transformation, but it's the environment and our inner tools that determine whether it flourishes or withers. This brings us to an essential point. Meaning is rarely something we find. It's something we create. The stories we tell ourselves about our pain can either bind us to it or liberate us from it. Someone who views failure as the end of the road will never see the opportunities it presents. Meanwhile, someone who frames that same failure as a stepping stone can use it to fuel their next venture. This is why reframing is so powerful. By shifting our perspective on suffering, not denying its pain but seeing its potential, we can begin to uncover its hidden gifts. It's not about glorifying pain, but about choosing how we respond to. Think about a caterpillar in its cocoon. The process of transformation is not gentle. It's a complete breakdown of its old form. Yet this destruction is necessary for the emergence of the butterfly. Our struggles might feel like destruction too, but perhaps they're part of a larger process we can't fully see in the moment. The question is whether we're willing to endure the cocoon phase, to sit with discomfort and trust in the possibility of transformation. Of course, this is easier said than done, but history, science, and even personal anecdotes seem to suggest one thing. While suffering may never feel welcome, it's often the beginning of something new. Now let's talk about the role of time in the process of finding meaning in suffering. In the heat of a painful moment, it's almost impossible to see beyond the immediate discomfort. Suffering feels endless, oppressive, and often senseless. But as time passes, we gain the distance and perspective necessary to reinterpret our experiences. Think about heartbreak, for example. In the moment, it feels like the end of the world. Yet, years later, many people look back and recognize that those moments of loss taught them about their own strength, boundaries, or what they truly value in relationships. It's not that time heals all wounds. It's that time gives us the clarity to make sense of them. And then there's the collective aspect of suffering. While pain is deeply personal, it's also one of the most profound connectors between people. Shared suffering builds empathy, creates bonds, and even inspires movements. History is filled with examples of individuals and groups transforming collective pain into something powerful. Civil rights movements, social justice causes, and even artistic masterpieces often emerge from deep suffering. This suggests that the value of suffering doesn't just reside within the individual. It can ripple outward, affecting communities and even generations. When we channel our pain into action or expression, we transform it into something that has the potential to heal, inspire, or change the world. But there's still the lingering question: is it necessary? Do we need to suffer to grow, or is there another path? This question divides thinkers across disciplines. Some argue that suffering is inevitable and essential, while others believe that intentional challenges, like stepping out of our comfort zones, can achieve the same growth without the devastating toll of trauma. After all, do we really need to hit rock bottom to climb higher? Or can we proactively seek growth through discipline, curiosity, and a willingness to embrace discomfort in smaller doses. This question opens the door to a more hopeful perspective, that while suffering may be unavoidable, it's not the only way to transform. Ultimately, suffering confronts us with choices. Do we let it define us, or do we define ourselves in response to it? The choice is never easy, and the process is far from linear. Some days we rise above it, and other days it overwhelms us. But in those moments of clarity, when we see even a glimmer of purpose in the pain, we catch a glimpse of something powerful. The possibility that suffering is not just an end, but a beginning. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough to make it worth enduring. One fascinating aspect of suffering is how it forces us to confront our priorities. When life is easy, it's tempting to drift, focusing on superficial goals or distractions. But hardship has a way of cutting through the noise, showing us what truly matters. People who've faced severe illness often describe a shift in perspective. They stop sweating the small stuff and start appreciating life's simple joys. This recalibration isn't just philosophical, it's deeply practical. Suffering narrows our focus, reminding us of life's impermanence and urging us to spend our energy on things that bring meaning, connection, and fulfillment. At the same time, suffering challenges the idea of control. As humans, we're wired to seek certainty, to plan, and to believe we can steer the course of our lives. But suffering, whether it's sudden loss, illness, or failure, shatters that illusion. This can feel terrifying, but it's also liberating. When we accept that some things are beyond our control, we can shift our focus to what we can influence, our mindset, our actions, and how we choose to move forward. Philosophers like the Stoics believe this mindset is key to resilience. As Marcus Aurelius put it, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength.